Hey everyone, Redlist here for the ADV Revival Tournament. I'm going to be I just finished the second round of uh, round robin matches. I exited with a really good record, went 3-0, beat all my opponents. And the reason I was able to do that is because, among other things, I carefully thought about which teams to bring that would match up well into my opponent's picks. That's how I approach tournament games in general, and I think that's a really useful sort of mindset, and it's something I want to demonstrate maybe for people who are learning the tier and want to see how that works. So I'm just going to go over my first week against this player, Exublem, uh, who went 3-0 in the first round, so I knew he was tough, but I also had some replays of him. I'm going to be taking you through the teams that he brought to his first round, and how I thought about exploiting those teams during the second round when we faced each other. How I chose my brings to be solid against a range of picks, but also to be especially solid against the stuff that he was known for bringing. So here he is. This is one of his previous games. This team seems pretty straightforward in a way. You've got the Aerodactyl Celebi core. This is probably Leech 3 attack Celebi, and you got Skarmory. So the idea of this team, I'm not sure how much detail I should go into, but you set up spikes, and then Aerodactyl's Rock Slide and Tyranitar's Rock Slide, because this is a physical Tyranitar. Force in rock resists repeatedly. Every rock resist bar Flygon is chipped by spikes, and every rock resist bar Jirachi doesn't have access to reliable recovery. So if you can force those Pokemon in repeatedly, and then, if it's Metagross, you break momentum with Swampert. If it's Swampert, you break momentum with Celebi. Then you force it out and repeat the cycle, force it in over and over again to chip it, and then clean with Arrow. This is basically the standard 5 that you see in that core. Got Swampert as the sort of defensive catch-all, and then Celebi handles Zapdos and Waters, so it's the special check. Aerodactyl cleans with Skarmory and Tyranitar, as I sort of described. This 6 also techs in Claydol. Claydol is helpful because this 5, as it exists, it really doesn't have a way to harm Skarmory very much. Tyranitar, Aerodactyl, and Celebi can all 3-hit KO Skarmory and Swampert, I guess. But that still gives Skarmory plenty of time to get spikes, and similarly, your own Skarmory will often trade spikes with their Skarmory. So these 6s tend to be weaker into enemy spikes, and he's cleverly sort of diverted that weakness with Claydol. But this is a fairly normal, ordinary 6. So then I looked at this game. This could very easily be a similar structure. You got the Celebi, you got the Tyranitar, but unfortunately this opponent lost after turn 23 when the Tyranitar was able to get 2 Dragon Dances and clean the team. So I didn't get much information about Exublem's tendencies and what he chose to bring from this replay. Okay, here's one he lost. Again, we're seeing the Aerodactyl Skarmory core. Powerful core. You got Tyranitar. I call this core ASS, Aerodactyl Sandstorm Spikes, and these are the 3 members you always bring. He's chosen to have Metagross here, as well as Salamance's Intimidate, in lieu of a physical check, in lieu of a Swampert. This helps him better against physical overwhelm squads. So a weakness of this 6 is you really only have Swampert as a physical check, so something like Metagross, and then Tyranitar, and then Aerodactyl, and then Salamence, or, those same threats in another order, maybe there's a Regirock or something, can overwhelm Swampert. And cleverly, he has the Intimidate and Metagross to sort of distribute his physical checks so that they can't all be overwhelmed. This team does have the issue that I sort of pointed out Claydol is fixing, which is you've got 3 grounded Mons, including a Blissey. Blissey is going to be staying for the long game, hopefully, or at least, it tilts the team towards that. and there's no sort of spike control. Metagross will let 3 layers go up. Tar and Arrow probably let 2 layers each. So this is going to be a very tough matchup if the opponent brings spikes. Looks like this opponent didn't bring spikes, but he lost anyways. Here's another team, and again we see the distributed defensive core. This time we also have the Claydol, and he may not have brought the Aerodactyl this time. This team seems a bit weaker into Zapdos. Both of these are checked by Zapdos. Skarm also similarly. Neither of these makes a particularly convincing Zapdos switch-in since Tar doesn't resist electric. And Claydol, while it resists electric, is threatened by either hidden power that Zap can run. It's vulnerable to Toxic from like a defensive Zap. We don't know what his last is. It's probably Aerodactyl, which gives him a good revenge if Zapdos gets a kill, but it doesn't necessarily put him in a good position to switch into Zapdos. Yeah. Okay, this team we see another Aerodactyl build. We've got his favorite 3 Pokemon, Tyranitar, Skarmory, Aerodactyl. And then he's also added Zap as the sort of pseudo special check. It can't switch into enemy Zapdos, but it can check waters. We have Gengar as the spin blocker. He's opted to run Destiny Bond for that more consistent role. When you're trading spikes with an enemy Skarm, having Gengar or a spinner is what makes that justifiable, assuming you're not a Superman team. Because if you bring Gengar or a similar Ghost, then the spike trade is in your favor because they can't necessarily spin it away. And if you bring a spinner, then the spike trade could also be in your favor because you can spin it away. So I like Gengar here to help him win the spike war. And then his last is Pert. Usually on this 6, this is a 6 I'm fond of as well. I tend to run like a refresh Pert. I don't really see how he handles status, especially given this isn't a Pursuit Tyranitar. But this team aims to be moving at maybe a fast enough pace that he can bowl over enemies, hoping to exploit his weaknesses. Even though there's no dedicated Zap switch-in, it can take all of Zap's moves if it's a Grass Zap. He has mid-grounds, he can bring Arrow in on Grass, he can bring Gengar in and sort of trade with it. And if Zapdos does manage to get a kill, Arrow can enter and sort of demolish something. Okay, so we've seen 5 of his games here, and every game he either could plausibly have an Arrow last or explicitly revealed an Arrow. So generally looking at those teams, I was thinking to myself, this guy likes Sandstorm, he likes Spikes, and he likes Aerodactyl as that late game cleaner and win con. He tends to play a bit faster of a game, but he's not afraid to pack defensive stuff. He doesn't necessarily ride all of his defenses on Swampert. Okay, so here's a team. This is another team. He doesn't have Tyranitar, but you can see Skarm and Arrow were still on full display. He, I think, has this thing as a spinner to handle opposing spikes. Protox Zapdos, I like that core. Yeah, this is another maybe a bit slower team, but it's still focused around the combination of Skarmory and Aerodactyl to make progress and to bowl him over. This is his last team. It doesn't have an Aerodactyl, surprisingly. It doesn't have a Skarmory, doesn't have spikes. Initially, I was thrown by this team because I was like, maybe this guy is really versatile, but having seen all of his other games and seen the fluidity with he played Aerodactyl and which he played Skarmory, I decided that even though this is a fighting type, it's a very different team than the teams we saw. It wasn't necessarily worth prepping for explicitly the way that I could prep for Skarmory, Aerodactyl, Tyranitar. So now let's talk about those 3 Pokemon and what are the main ways to abuse Skarmory, Aerodactyl, Tyranitar type teams. Well, there's a few issues that they have. As I mentioned earlier, if they lack Claydol last and if they lack Gengar last specifically, you can spike on them and exploit them. Swampert is basically carrying all of the defensive weight and it's not immune to spikes, so you just force Pert in over and over again, force it to take hits from different attackers, and even though they have their own offensive progress makers, if you can just prevent them from making progress, you can typically make progress pretty quickly against them if you're running a more physically offensive team with spikes, with your own spikes. Similarly, if you run like Tyranitar, Metagross, and Salamence, Pert is probably going to be able to check 2 of those. You can run like Grass on your Tar, DD Grass Tar, popular, or just a Guacamole, 3 special attacks plus Brick Break set, which features Grass. And you can sort of force Pert to take a Grass by beating around the bush and hiding what your Tar set is to sort of ambush the Pert with Grass. You can also boom on meta. And Agility Metagross deserves special mention against teams like these because it's a late gamer that can actually dispatch Aerodactyl. It can actually handle Aerodactyl and not get revenged. DD Mence is the same way. So both of those are good Pokemon to use into this style. Another thing that they have issues with. So Aerodactyl teams tend to be weak into enemy rock moves because they require these 2 teams essentially for some sort of additional spike play and or offensive power. And they require it as the special check / Swampert switch in. You've got Celebi here. So they can't they can't necessarily handle repeated rock moves. They aren't going to be the solidest in terms of rock resist, especially on the sort of Gengar variants like we're seeing here. Like, what's a rock move? What comes in on a rock move on this team? Basically just Pert, right? I mean, they could lose Skarmory, but that could put them way behind long term, or lose Tyranitar to a rock move or 2 rock moves. Also, what does this team have problems with offensively? So Aerodactyl is nice because it can sort of abuse common physical walls with those spikes, but it's not infallible. Namely, Bold Jirachi can repeatedly Wish versus Aerodactyl, and Aerodactyl can't really make any progress without clicking Earthquake some of the time versus Bold Jirachi. Now you might think, well, just click Earthquake, but Earthquake tends to be very exploitable. Like, remember when I was first talking about, I don't think it was this team, but another team being weak to Zapdos? Zapdos can enter on Earthquake if Bold Jirachi protects or comes in on an Earthquake. It's actually only 2-hit KO'd, so it can simply exit, and when Zapdos enters, Aerodactyl is very much on the back foot. You can also bring your own Aerodactyl to punish Aerodactyl's Earthquakes. If you bring Aerodactyl into Aerodactyl, then their Aerodactyl needs to click Rock Slide a lot, otherwise your Aerodactyl enters for free. And as I said, these sort of structures, they're very ill-equipped to deal with enemy rock moves. I guess the variant we saw with Suicune and Metagross is less so, and Claydol. But generally speaking, if you can have a strong rock move on your side, then you can be in a good spot. Okay, so what's next? Now I'm going to pull up my games and sort of explain how I approached building for these teams and exploiting their general weaknesses. So the teams that I brought were, do I have it with me? I'll just show it from the replay. So the first team I brought was a Superman team. It features defensive Jirachi, as I said, and it features Flygon and Pursuit Tyranitar. And what this means is into an enemy Aerodactyl, you're in an extremely good spot. The reason is, so Jirachi basically mandates that they click Earthquake some amount of the time. Otherwise, it can simply wall Aerodactyl and cancel Aerodactyl's momentum every time Aerodactyl comes in. But Zapdos, Flygon, and your own Aerodactyl, as well as Skarmory, also punish Earthquake extremely, extremely hard, and basically make it impossible for Aerodactyl's team to survive repeatedly taking that risk and earthquaking when Jirachi could enter. You also have Skarm as a mid-ground. Skarm doesn't take a ton from Rockslide, so you can simply use Skarm to scout Earthquake without having to risk your Jirachi directly. Also, you have Flygon, and Flygon forces their Aerodactyl to click Double Edge. But you have a great Double Edge switch in, well, all 4 of these are normal resists. And Tyranitar can actually click Pursuit into opposing Aerodactyl. And that actually 2-hit KOs it, basically limiting the number of times they can Double Edge. Also, their Double Edge plus, or once they take a Pursuit, my arrow's Double Edge can now kill their arrow. So between these two, you have a very good in to all of Aerodactyl's moves. And that's not even, both of them are rock resists. So you have ins against all of Arrow's moves between these two that also completely, fully cover Rock Slide. You have this guy to punish an Arrow that doesn't Rock Slide enough. And you have Tyranitar sort of as an innate Aerodactyl limiter. And you have Skarm as the mid-ground. So this is the absolute most stable team you can have, as far as I'm concerned, against an Aerodactyl Spikes build. Maybe you can do something a bit more stable with like Claydol, but in terms of like teams that are very stacked in that matchup, this team is certainly one that I favor. I built this team with Eden a few months ago, and I built it for exactly this situation. We saw an opponent who we thought was likely to run an Aerodactyl Superman. Of course, Aerodactyl Superman, we thought that they were going to run Aerodactyl Superman because I had been running Aerodactyl Superman, and an Aerodactyl Superman is a good answer to enemy Aerodactyl Superman because if you're slightly more defensively inclined towards Aerodactyl, Superman takes care of the spikes, and then you have your own Aerodactyl to hit back with. Well, we just figured we would make it even better into Aerodactyl, and we made basically the best Superman team for handling Aerodactyl that has ever existed, as far as I'm concerned. So yeah, I'll show you now the replay for how this battle went, and we can sort of talk through the moves. So turn 1, he goes Tar, I go Tar. I figured I would conservatively switch here, go to Skarmory. Skarmory's Thief Skarmory, so it doesn't necessarily have leftovers at the start of the battle, meaning it's kind of hard to get started because you have to click Thief in order to get that regeneration that makes Skarmory so hard to kill. If you click Spikes immediately, then Skarmory can be a bit vulnerable to getting picked off. But because we have the Wish Jirachi on the team, we can sort of mitigate that weakness of Skarmory's. But even so, I was worried that he would do something like Brick Break into Fire Blast here. Luckily, Tyranitar usually shouldn't Brick Break, even if it's a Brick Fire variant, into enemy lead Tar, because very bulky Tyranitar can typically take enemy Tar Brick Break without a held item boosting it. He clicks Earthquake, even better. So I'm thinking this is kind of a BKC Tar. In an ideal world, maybe it's CB Tar. And I'm just going to spike here to scout the Magneton. And he proves he's not Magneton, or, he's Magdoll, or he misplayed. So I just proceed to go in and take the leftovers there. So now my Skarmory can heal. It can be a bit more comfortable over time. And I then go to check the Tyranitar. Flygon is not a great Tar check when the Tar is punching, but it at least does something. But Flygon lets in 2 extremely dangerous Pokemon, Skarmory and Gengar. Gengar is almost always used with Skarmory, and Skarmory should be sent out first in most cases. So I figured he was likely to click to Skarmory there. I went to Zapdos preemptively to punish it, to sort of get some momentum versus him. I already have Spikes up, so I can kind of scout his team, shuffle him around, see what his special check is, and Zapdos does a lot. So I click T-Bolt if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, T-Bolt, just to see what the special check is. I get the lucky crit. Celebi cannot really damage Zapdos, even though it's a Zapdos check for its ability to take Zapdos' moves. So I opt to just sort of scout the Celebi set, burn some Leech PP, and generally pester the Celebi by clicking Toxic, if I'm not mistaken. Yep. And he leeches again. I do some additional damage. I'm thinking maybe this is Leech 3 attacks that would fit in on the Tar, Scarm, Arrow build that I suspect that he's running. In which case it's very chippable. It's going to be taking the spikes every time, and unfortunately it's already at 29% untoxic because I got the crit. So it's going to become very difficult for him to switch it in repeatedly. So he goes back to Tyranitar. I switch out as well. Skarmory, Celebi doesn't have any reason to HP Fire unless he's doing a mad predict here. So I figure Skarmory's a good mid-ground, and he may not be packing a spinner, in which case Skarmory is very, very good. Okay, so I then go to Jirachi. As I said, Jirachi is a bold, physically defensive version. Tyranitar is not doing a ton to Jirachi. I don't even believe it 2-hit KOs through Protect with Earthquake. So I'm safe to sort of go to Jirachi and then pester his team either using Toxic or using Fire Punch. Probably leading with the Toxic and or passing a Wish here. Yep, and he goes for Focus Punch. I didn't really see that one coming. I wasn't sure, I guess, what he would do against Jirachi. If it were me, maybe I would have gone to Skarm just for the spike because I don't have any spikes up. On the other hand, he's seen that I'm Superman, so I have 3 flying members. He doesn't know the last, but it can probably be flying as well. It's probably Gengar or Arrow from his perspective. So I immediately go Zap to punish that. Instead, Zap ends up taking a crit Focus Punch. Sucks so much. Now, Zap is one of my most important players here. Because he's shown his special check and it's extremely chipped. It's just going to die to a Thunderbolt. So I went immediately back to Rachi to try and save Zap from maybe a Rock Slide, because his Tar, of course, takes all of Zap's moves. And so I go to Jirachi, try and get that sort of stable defensive moment off. And so I Protect here. He goes Earthquake, great. So we're healing. We're kind of walling this thing. It could crit us, but if I'm lucky, it won't crit us. So I wish... And now suddenly I'm back to full. I let Jirachi Protect, and in comes Celebi. If it is a Leech variant, doesn't have Recover, I want to kill it immediately, so I click Fire Punch to try and eliminate it, put it out of the picture, and he goes back to Tar. So this is probably going to be where I go back to Flygon. Yeah, because Flygon, it takes a ton from Punch. It doesn't like taking those punches. But it can force Tar out. It can get that additional leftovers recovery with Tect. So I'm at least not going to have a dead Flygon, even if it's not going to be the healthiest Flygon. Now, I don't want to get sub-passed on, which is why I immediately go Tar there, instead of conservatively protecting again. I don't really have a good Zapdos check on this team. The closest would probably be my own Zapdos, which has been extremely... brutalized at this stage. It's extremely chipped because it took the crit Focus Punch. So I'm kind of having to make do using Tar. He hasn't seen my Tar set, so he doesn't know I'm Pursuit Tar, which I am. So I'm more safe to go to Tar than I would be if he knew my set. So I'm using Bluffing here to try and catch him out. He uses Protect, scouts me. Okay, I thought I was going to chip him with Suit, but I didn't. Now I'm kind of spaghetti on my face because I just revealed the Tar set. And I'm going to go to Rachi just because Rachi can take a little bit of Zapdos' damage, even though it doesn't have any specially defensive investment. It has that max HP, meaning I can sort of Wish Loop. Now, this is never optimal. It could always paralyze me. It could always crit me, and that would be a disaster. But I'm at least going to be able to heal up for now and maybe force it out or threaten it with Toxic. Okay, and he goes to Pert, and this is where I click Toxic. To me, I'm popping the hell off. When this happened, I was cooing to myself. Because Swampert, he doesn't know this, but Arrow is my last. So Swampert is his linchpin from what he's shown in dealing with my Aerodactyl. Yet now it's Toxic, it's essentially dead. So I'm popping off. I'm keeping in mind it could be Refresh Swampert, but because he didn't necessarily show that in Scouts, I'm a bit more optimistic, and then I was crushed, my dreams were destroyed. This team's actually in a dumb position. Because it actually has no way to make progress versus Refresh Swampert. It has 3 Toxic users, so if you're clever, you can just PP stall Refresh, because Refresh only has 32 PP, but I have 48 PP of Toxic, so that way I can technically make progress. I also have Thief on Scarm to make progress. I have Spikes to make progress, but it's already in, so it doesn't take Spikes anymore. And I already thiefed, so I can't thief again. My friend Big Will, actually, when I was showing him the team, suggested, he thought of this very situation, and he suggested that I run HP Grass on the Tyranitar to sort of diffuse Swampert in this case and be able to push it out without needing to do this 32 pp burn toxic strategy, if you can imagine. So I'm going to sort of angle for that, and then when he's least expecting it, because it's not like his pert can make any progress versus me either. When he's least expecting it, that's when I will drop the old grass from Tyranitar in on him. I just need to wait for him to give me an opening. So I also am doing some spikes here. I think this thing is going to be coming back in. So I've got to kind of annoy it and pester it. I go to Zap here. I forget if that's just to handle the Swampert, but it mid-grounds against the Scarm anyways. I realized it's very important to keep spikes away, because if I do this toxic PP stall strategy, I'm probably going to be switching Jirachi in a lot. And it takes spikes each time, and that could get very, very annoying. Anywho, he goes back to Pert. This Zap just can't touch Pert besides Toxic, so since it's Ref Pert, it can't touch it in general. But I Toxic again, just trying to get those free turns, maybe burn some PP. I do have pressure after all. And just exert some pressure generally. I predict the Refresh, go into Scarm for the chip heal, and then immediately have Scarm exit. Oh, no, I spike, never mind. And then spike once, and then have Scarm exit, back to Zap, get this thing PP stalled. Not that that's my main strategy, right? You should never build with PP stall as your plan, but it's an idea. Anyways, so then I Toxic again. My goal is just to burn some Refresh PP, but he's kind enough to go straight to Tar here, allowing me to sort of pressure it passively just by switching between my various resists. Unfortunately, Flygon's extremely chipped, meaning I have to go to Rashi and risk getting Earthquaked and getting crit and all this bullshit while I stall the Tar. So then I wish I don't protect there because I'm afraid he might exit to something like Zapdos that might be able to threaten me, or even Skarmory. If he exits to something that Flygon can wall, then I can go to Flygon and receive a Wish with it, which could be very, very potent. So it's better to have the Wish in the air. Okay. But instead, he exits and I protect. I'm feeling pretty good because Tar is basically defused. It was going to be a pain in the ass to deal with given how it's already chipped the hell out of my Flygon. So this is Mono Purse, meaning it doesn't have Earthquake. So I can just wall it with Jirachi and burn some more Refresh PP with Toxic. I know this looks like the dumbest thing ever, but this is my backup, right? My first choice is that I'm actually going to drop Tar in at some point, and immediately start exerting that pressure again. Okay, so here I go to Zap. Again, I know it can't one-shot my sweet Zapdos, so I'm more than happy to just drop Zap in and receive the Wish with it. I think I'm going to go back to Rachi here, just because with no spikes down, Arrow is actually not pressuring Rachi that much, and Rachi just takes that Rock Slide like a beast. What a boss. So he goes Scarm, and I correctly read that with a Fire Punch. I think we both kind of realized Rachi's not going down without spikes. And in the past I've stuffed that with going to Zap, but now I decide it's time to just eliminate the Scarm straight out. As he, aggressively pulls it in, and there's nothing I can really do on this team to limit Scarm besides either punch it to death or bring Zap in and force it out. Anyways, so then he goes back to Swampert, the unkillable wall of his team. These two spikes are permanent because I don't have a spinner. He immediately refreshes the Toxic off. I don't appreciate that. I don't think it's a good move because he doesn't seem to have realized that I'm going to be Refresh PP stalling him. But instead, so he then gives me my opening. So notice what happened here. He took a Toxic without refreshing it off, and he let me receive a Wish at the same time, meaning Jirachi's at full, and he's Toxic. So he's essentially going to have to burn a turn refreshing. And that's where I decide, oh, nope, I misplay. Rip. Okay, so then I repeatedly click Toxic. He repeatedly clicks Refresh. I click Wish. Now I'm going to say, okay, can I have Flygon receive this wish? And can I handle it? And the answer is I'm not going to do that. But by having that as a threat, I mean, Flygon is very hard for Arrow to deal with because it'll need to lock into Double Edge. And I went over in sort of the earlier portion of this video why that is bad. I can then get another Toxic. Oh, nope, I go to Zap. I don't remember this well, evidently. Okay, so I'm burning that Surf PP regardless. Great. And I click Tox again. He clicks Tox. Everyone's toxing each other. And that's when I go to Flygon. Because I want the chip heal. You know what I'm saying? I want that sweet, sweet chip heal. And if he clicks Surf, his Pert is going to be Toxic. If it's Toxic, then I can go Tar. So I was thinking, like, I didn't want Flygon to die here. I wanted to get the chip heal. The reason why, of course, is because Flygon has the third Toxic. So if I'm going to be PP stalling Refresh, I need Flygon to be around for that. So it needs to be chip healed to the point where Surf can't kill it so that I can have it receive a wish. Anyways, all that is to say, if Flygon dies, then he's Toxic. He's just taken 12%. He's going to be low, and he's going to be taking spikes the next time he enters, meaning my Tar can now bully him. So Tar comes in, and I'm thinking, let's click Grass, and let's obliterate this Swampert. And I click Grass. He clicks Refresh. Kind of has to. I mean, what's he going to do? I click Grass again. I'm not too worried about this Pert anymore since it's just taken a Grass. And I end up eliminating the Pert. Now, he hasn't caught on to the fact that I have Arrow last. So it looks kind of okay to him that he's lost his Pert. It doesn't look good, but it looks okay. So now I'm just going to crunch the Zap, get some sweet, sweet chip on it. So hopefully my own Zap can pose more of a threat to it, and maybe if I can get the 2 crunches, I can now one-shot it with Double Edge with my own Arrow, rather than having to faff around with Rock Slide, which misses. Okay, so I go Arrow and I click Double Edge. And he protects, smart. He showed the Protox Zap in Scout, and now he shows it in-game as well. But I clicked Double Edge, and I'm in a spot where I'm probably going to be handling this. He needs to click Rock Slide there, because otherwise my Arrow can just, like, mollywop him very hard. So I go straight to Rachi. I could have easily gone to Skarm, but I like to sometimes do the offensive play, even when I have a safe mid-ground like Skarm, just because that saves the mid-ground for later, right? And then the next time, he also has to respect the Skarm, whereas if he Rock Slided the Skarm, it probably would be in no position to re-enter later and do its thing. Okay, so Rachi. I immediately pass the Wish. The idea being, I guess I'm going to tech this thing. Yeah, I guess I forget how I played this endgame. So I go to Skarm, and the idea is Arrow will enter now. Arrow comes in and enters, and now I'm going to click Double Edge again. And he goes to his own Arrow. I decide it's time to win the speed tie, and I win the speed tie and kill his Arrow, and then he forfeits. So that's kind of how a team specifically built to defensively exploit Aerodactyl can shut it down with this sort of nexus of Arrow answers. I think Arrow is probably the hardest to accidentally beat Pokemon. So if you're a newer player, I recommend you think explicitly about rock resists, and explicitly about what your plan is versus spikes plus Arrow, so that you can have a good defensive tactic into it. I play Arrow all the time, full disclosure. I played this exact 6 in the past, I think. And I can tell you, its big weaknesses are cores like this that handle Arrow. Its other big weaknesses are things like Fortress and Cloister, which can enter on your Skarmory and win the Spike War immediately, because you don't have a spinner, and they have a spinner and a spiker in one, and you don't have a spin blocker, meaning every time it enters on Skarmory, it can spin successfully. And maybe it gets multiple spikes in the process. That can quickly become very difficult for a team like this to deal with. Even though you have the 3 aerial Pokemon, the other 3 would really like to be around to reinforce your defensive backbone. So I was between some either fortress or cloister build for the next game, or to bring a build I was more comfortable with, which featured choice band Tyranitar. Now, as I said, another weakness of these sort of faster Aerodactyl builds is that they typically only have the one rock resistant Swampert, unless it's a Jirachi or a Metagross variant. Meaning a choice band rock attack plus spikes is quickly going to get out of hand if it's Tyranitar and Aerodactyl dealing those attacks out. Full disclosure, in this battle I got super lucky. Okay, so I lead with the Tyranitar. This is choice band Tyranitar. And I immediately, so he's shows that he's HP fighting, but of course Jirachi's weak. So I immediately just begin to stomp it with my sweet Earthquake, and I go to Blissey to try and handle it. Even though that was hidden power fighting, I believe, Blissey is so bulky that I'm very unlikely to die to an HP fighting, meaning I can sort of immediately see what his Bliss answer is, do some forcing out. He's probably not Metagross, so the most dangerous Bliss answer, besides something like, I don't know, his own choice band Tyranitar would do well. So he then goes to Tar, and I burn it. And by the way, this was a choice band Tyranitar, spoiler alert. So I'm already getting extremely lucky. I'm sorry about this. I wish I had a less lucky game that I could show. But yeah, he goes, his Tyranitar now can't threaten Blissey, let alone threaten Skarmory. So I click to Skarmory, and I'm like, okay, let's immediately set some spikes up, and let's get this Jirachi preemptively killed. It's a 17, so 2 layers of spikes will just ensure that this thing never walks the face of the earth again. Okay, so I spike. I'm a Superman, so I can just afford to trade spikes, especially because my Skarm is healing. He shows that he's Thief, super genius. Obviously, I'm a huge fan of Thief Skarm. This is Taunt Skarm, but it's really slow. Jirachi built this team, Jirachi with 2 E's. So you can blame him if it underperforms by stuff like that happening. I had a variant of this with extremely fast Taunt Skarm, but I decided that the ability of Skarm to just sort of pivot into things is very, very needed on a fast team like this. You don't realize that until you run a weaker Skarm, or you run Cloyster or Fori or Smeargle as your spiker, but Skarm, especially in the early game, provides so much defensive utility. It just breaks momentum into Metagross, breaks momentum into Celebi. Salamence can scout all sorts of things, Salamence. It just does so much. Anyways, so that's why I decided on the bulkier Skarm. This Skarm is largely there to taunt Blissey instead of taunt enemy Skarm, because a taunted Blissey or a taunted Refresh Pert, right, makes this team a lot more apt to break. So then I go Sanctuary the Zapdos. This is the same Zapdos set I believe I used. No, this is a different Zapdos. This is a Protox Zapdos. So I immediately click Thunderbolt. Thunderbolt? No. Oh, Toxic. I immediately click Toxic. I was expecting to see his special check there. I think he's smart enough to be very afraid of Substitute Zapdos. That's very standard right now, and you can easily see it with these 3 in the back. So I was kind of expecting him to switch out to something that could break sub, and that was his special check. Instead, he goes to Tar. That was actually a really cunning move by him. Tar is kind of useless, and it still breaks sub, so it's good to have it around and good to have it healthy. Or it's fine to have it dead and fine to have it unhealthy. Okay, so I kill it, and he immediately shows arrow. Last game, we kind of both hid our arrows from each other. I think we were both hoping that the other one wouldn't know that we brought it. In this game, I'm still hiding my arrow, but he's more aggressive, shows the arrow. And I show the tech on Zap. Now, this is another great tech for arrow teams. This is a great way to stop arrow in its tracks, is running Protect on random shit. Protect Metagross, even though in theory it should lose to arrow because it's weak to Earthquake, and it's weak to spikes. Arrow just cannot revenge it for the life of it because you protect every time. We saw that last game with Jirachi, of course, very easily scouting arrows. And then this Zapdos is a great example. I love running a Zapdos or a Moltres with Protect. Protox are great on both of them because fire types and because steel types generally can't switch into fire and electric types. So if you run Toxic with Protect, you can threaten a huge amount of the metagame with just 2 moves on Pokemon with small movesets. Okay, so I teched, and now he's shown Double Edge. So he doesn't even one-hit KO me. Meanwhile, he still hasn't shown me his special check. You can't see it right now, but 3 spikes are down. So I'm thinking, let's click Thunderbolt, let's see what his special check is, and let's chip it to the point where maybe we can force it to heal, or otherwise pester it and let in our big breaker, Gemini, the 41% Choice Band Tyranitar. So instead of showing me his special check straight away, he goes to Rachi, and then he goes back to Arrow. Extremely smart play from him, resetting the move, and now he's going to click Rock Slide for sure. Since he knows I'm Protect, he can no longer afford to click Double Edge and faff around. And knowing that he knows that, I immediately go to my Rock Resist Flygon to absorb the Rock Slide. Now he has this back Scarm here, but it hasn't shown that it has Toxic. In fact, it very likely doesn't have Toxic with that set. So I'm more than happy to just chip this thing. With Slide, it's not going to do a ton, but because my Zapdos is modest, it's now unambiguously in range of Thunderbolt, and remember, Zapdos can just enter for free. Okay, so I continually bring Zap in, knowing that it just threatens this whole team and does a lot. My whole team is either going to hit his Scarm really hard, or it has healing, or it's airbound, so there's no way Scarm can really hurt the team. But he decides to peck the Bliss and gives me a fire move on it instead. Okay. So now he's going to finish up his Spike project. I think he's now at 3 layers. But generally the fact that his Scarm is going to lose long-term to Flygon means he has to exit, and he shows Swampert as his Rock Resist. Yeah, so I just simply go to Blissey, even though Swampert is likely able to beat Blissey one-on-one. Blissey can take its special move and kind of scout what set it might be. I think I plugged it into the calc, and deal out a Toxic. Now if this is an off-pert, it's going to not have Refresh, almost certainly, meaning that Toxicking it opens my Aerodactyl up extremely hard to sweep, also my Flygon. On the other hand, if it's not an off-pert, if it's something like a slow def pert or a refresh 3 attacks pert, then Blissey will more than likely be able to dispatch it. And I'm more than willing to let Blissey die here. I think his last isn't likely to be some offensive juggernaut. So I heal Blissey. Blissey actually takes about 40 to 50% from Arrow Double Edge, which is the most damaging move to her. So I could plausibly keep her in and have her just deal some status. That's not the Blissey set I'm on. So instead I go to Scarm to sort of scout what things are going to happen. Again, I said that this taunt on Scarm is useful for its ability to prevent Pert from refreshing. I'm kind of thinking about that since he did it last game. And I'm personally very partial to these 3 moves plus refresh. So I'm just disabling that preemptively using this Scammery. Okay, now I Drill Peck. If I can break this thing with Scarm, then I won't have to break it with Arrow. That's what I'm thinking. Then I go straight to Zapdos. Now, if he goes Arrow, he's going to have to commit to a move. As I Protect, I can kill this with HP Grass. And, okay, so he shows his last, and it turns out to be Blissey. The special answer par excellence. So I'm afraid of status coming from this Blissey. Meanwhile, Blissey can't really hurt my Blissey without revealing that it has Toxic. So I just go straight to Blissey and take whatever move it is. It happens to be Ice Beam. So we'll either see... Okay, so he does a really smart play there. It's too little too late, but it is smart. Sacking Pert blocks my recovery, and because Blissey is at 43%, Arrow now one-shots her. So he simply goes to Arrow, and forces Blissey out. Next time Blissey enters, I will have to take a lot of damage. Unfortunately for him, if his Blissey gets a kill, my Blissey will enter for free and heal. But at least until then, that makes my Blissey extremely useless. Because I don't really see a late game where Blissey is going to be that needed, since Blissey's only real role is that it 1v1s his Blissey. Since the Skarm is not going to be difficult to take down and it doesn't really hurt the arrow, I'm more than fine just dropping the Blissey. I have this extremely based Brick Break Tyranitar that can enter on his Blissey, basically making my own Blissey redundant. Okay, so then I go to my own arrow, and it's time for me to start rock sliding, which I do. And yep, again, he doesn't have Toxic, so I'm fine to just keep clicking rock slide and eventually blow through this thing. He goes to arrow, threatening the speed tie, which I think he thinks I will beat around. And I do indeed beat around it, going to Flygon. His Blissey enters. Immediately I'm thinking, let's go Tar, because Tar, if he kills my Tar, then my arrow will suddenly enter and force his Blissey out and just basically win me the game. But yeah, otherwise, okay, he chooses to kill it. So I go arrow and double edge and go to Flygon on the rock slide. Click protect, just try and get this thing dead, which succeeds. Okay, so that was the game. Those were the games. Sorry if that was a bit long-winded, but this is a style that's very close to my heart, the style that we both brought, Aerodactyl Sandstorm Spikes, or ASS. And I just wanted to show how teams can be built to take advantage of that style and to sort of deal with its weaknesses, because frankly, if I'm not mistaken, during the first few rounds of this tournament, during the first week, I felt like I could bring it against most of my opponents and kind of be scot-free, like they didn't know how to punish it in the builder. So I think that's very useful information to have. The more I get good at this game, the more I think in terms of styles, in terms of scouting my opponent's team style, in terms of building within certain styles and creating variations that fix their problems or exacerbate their strengths. And the more I think about figuring out my opponent's styles so that I can explicitly target them and counter them and get easier matchups to win, like you saw in this game. Yeah. So I reckon I'm going to make 2 more of these videos for my other 2 weeks for the second round. Just going into how I look at my opponent's teams and build against what I think they're going to bring, and make team choices, and then going over the games themselves. So thanks for watching, and adios.